Nick will get that started. So welcome everyone to Keeping Cats and Wildlife Safe. Today joining us is Dr. Jessica Haines. Dr. Jessica Haines is an assistant professor at MacEwan University. She enjoys teaching about ecology, evolution, and conservation biology, and is currently working on Franklin's ground squirrel in Alberta in collaboration with Nature Alberta. In her spare time, she likes to be outdoors exploring nature, usually accompanied by her 2 Labrador retrievers. She is also owned by 2 indoor cats, one of whom is a trained therapy cat who has helped people relax and feel joy. So thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Great, thanks for having me. So thanks, Steph, and thanks, Nature Alberta. And thank you all for joining us. It's really nice to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about cats and wildlife. So as Steph said, I'm a wildlife biologist. I'm also a dog owner, as was mentioned in my bio. This is both as a hobby, and I actually occasionally also professionally teach people how to train their own dogs, though I primarily focus on training hunting dogs using rewards-based methods. And as you'll see in the talk, that's also transferred over to some of my cats as well, who also do some training. So you'll hear a lot about my cats in this talk, but I'll also talk about cats more broadly. So this is one of my cats in this opening slide. This is Jake hanging out in his catio that we have on the side of our house. So I'll start out by talking about why we should why we should worry about this, why we should keep cats inside. Probably if you're in this talk, you already think that this might be important because often that's who comes to the talks. But just in case any of you aren't yet convinced about keeping cats inside, I'm going to talk a bit about that. So first of all, the talk was about keeping cats and wildlife safe. And for me, that's one of the #1 reasons for keeping my cats inside. And there's lots of research that has shown that cats have a really big impact on wildlife. And you may not actually know if your cat is hunting because they don't often bring everything home with them. So there are some cats that bring their things home and they show off what they've caught. But there's also a lot of cats that don't. So there's actually been some studies that have monitored cats to look at how much they catch and what they're actually killing. And in some cases, their owners didn't actually know that they were killing things or that they were killing as much as they were. There are lots of studies on this. There was a review that came out in 2013 that looked at the US, and they found that free-ranging domestic cats kill anywhere from 1 to 4 billion birds and 6 to 22 billion mammals in the US. In mainland US, so they didn't look at Alaska and Hawaii. In Canada, we don't see quite as large numbers, probably because we don't have quite the same population size as the US, but we still have between 100 and 350 million birds killed per year by domestic cats. Some of that mortality does come from unowned cats, but in this talk, I'll focus on owned cats because that's what a lot of us can control. And I'm also talking about urban environments primarily, although a lot of this does apply to rural environments. So obviously cats have a big impact on wildlife. That's a pretty significant number. And if these were predators that species evolved with, then they would have evolved ways to protect themselves from this predator. But this is an invasive species, essentially. It's a species that we've brought to new environments. The species that live here in Canada didn't evolve with domestic cats as their predators. So this is all the mortality on top of everything else that happens to birds and other wildlife in their natural environment. So it certainly is a significant concern, especially because a lot of these species are in decline and quite significant decline, especially the kinds of species that cats would have access to in urban areas. A lot of those species, unfortunately, are the ones that are in decline in Canada. There have been some attempts to reduce the impact of free-ranging cats. So there are a lot of studies looking at whether you can put something on their collar to try and reduce predation. And that can help. There are a few studies that show, for example, that having a bell on their collar can be helpful. But there's also a lot of anecdotal discussions that I've heard that bells aren't always effective because cats learn how to silence them. And certainly cats that are stalking up on a bird or a mammal, they're probably not going to be very bouncy and causing that bell to make noise. And so it's not 100% effective. We're still going to see a lot of mortality of wildlife, even with something that's supposed to protect them, like a bell. There have been some other types of contraptions, I guess, designed to try and prevent cats from killing wildlife. This is called a cat bib. It's in this study in biological conservation if you're interested in reading more about it. It certainly did have a big impact on predation. So they actually saw 81% reduction in birds and 81% reduction in bird mortality from cats just not being able to catch birds with this on them. 33% reduction in how many amphibians and reptiles they were killing, and 45% reduction in mammals. But as you can probably guess from looking at this, it's pretty disruptive to the cat. And if you have outdoor cats, we'll talk about this in a minute, but there are other dangers that affect cats, and this could impede them from actually being able to escape those dangers. So this might help wildlife to an extent, although even with those reductions, they're still killing a significant amount of wildlife. But you're also potentially putting the cats in danger by having them wear something like this. This is a little less disruptive, and this type of collar is pretty effective because it's large and colorful. And so that makes it easier for birds to see the cats. And they did see fewer birds being caught by cats who had these collars on in a study that was done in the US. There are limitations though, because a lot of these contraptions that we're putting on cats to try and reduce their impact aren't going to help with things like nests or fledglings, because those are young animals that just aren't able to get away. So it doesn't matter if you make the cat more visible, those prey are still going to get caught by cats. And I also didn't see a study looking at this collar in mammals, and I would bet it would be less effective in mammals because there's differences in color vision in birds and mammals. And at least in some mammals, they don't see the same colors as birds. And so probably wouldn't be as visible to the mammals as it is to the birds, and probably less likely to have an improvement in the amount of mammals being caught by cats. And there's also a lot of challenges because these deterrents are going to vary a lot depending on the time and the year and the time of year and the location and what species are present and their vulnerability. So I already mentioned that nestlings and chicks and things like that are going to be more susceptible to being eaten by cats because they just can't escape. So even if you're going to try and use a deterrent like this on cats, it's just not going to be effective. And so it's not going to help 100%. This is my cat Minnie. It looks like she's out exploring nature, but she's actually just in our front yard in a supervised walk in the front yard. And so she's just representing cats that are exploring nature, where she's supervised, but the ones we're talking about are not supervised. So although there are ways to reduce predation of wildlife, and I've already mentioned there's issues with those, there's also other good reasons to keep cats indoors, even if you're not too concerned about wildlife. So there's a lot of risks for cats that are out free roaming. So in Edmonton, for example, we have a pretty good urban coyote population. I've seen them walk right up my street in broad daylight. I don't even live next to a green space. Those coyotes are definitely a risk to free roaming cats and are potentially going to kill any cats that they're able to catch that are outside. There's also a very big risk of cats being hit by cars. There was a study, there's not a lot of studies on this that I could find, but there was a study that looked at the ways that cats died And when cats died suddenly, the majority had been hit by cars. And so that's a really big risk for cats as well. There's also risk of other people. So I see this on Facebook pages a lot. People will say, oh, there's a cat in my yard and it's obviously starving. It obviously doesn't have an owner. I should feed it. I should take it in. And I can tell you that if Minnie, who's the cat in this picture, showed up in someone's front yard or backyard, she would absolutely tell them that she's starving, even though she's very overweight. So that's not actually a reliable indication of whether the cat has an owner. But for me, that would be one of my concerns, though, if I let my cats free roam, which I don't, but if I did, I would actually worry about people taking them in, because Minnie would absolutely beg for food and people would think that she was moving into their house. There's also risks, especially in rural areas, where cats can be harmed. So my cat, Jake, that was in the first picture I showed at the beginning of the talk, he was shot when he was a stray. So he was obviously perceived as a pest and someone shot him. I've also heard discussions of people thinking about live trapping cats when they're being bothered by them in their yard and then releasing them in various places. Some of this is obviously illegal, but some people don't care. And if you're letting your cat roam, there's going to be risks. They also can be a pest. So cats pee and poop in other people's yards. They'll pick fights with other cats. And I actually think there's something to be said of being considerate for our neighbors. So we don't let dogs run loose in cities for lots of reasons. So why don't we apply that to cats? There are lots of examples of people complaining in gardening groups about damage that was done to their garden by cats. And there was a study that was done in Canada, and it was a small study, but they did find that people's biggest concerns and complaints with free roaming cats was the fact that they were peeing and pooping on their properties, and people were also concerned about wildlife. So I think that us as cat owners have a responsibility to think about others that live in our neighborhoods and live in these areas with us, and think about whether it's fair to let our cats roam on their properties. So I've already talked about how there's a big risk to wildlife of cats being free roaming. There are some deterrents that can help, but they don't completely reduce the mortality to zero for wildlife, especially for vulnerable wildlife like young animals. There's also risks of cats being killed by wildlife like coyotes if they're free ranging. And there's also other risks to cats like getting hit by cars, and they cause disruptions in people's yards, and they're just not seen very positively by some people, and so we should maybe keep them inside. To me, that seems like a lot of evidence that maybe we should keep cats inside. But there's actually a lot of people that still let their cats outside and don't want to keep them in. So why do people still let cats outside? Well, there's a few reasons. I think for some people, it's some lack of interest in the risks, or denial of the risks, or simply lack of awareness. So a lot of people don't see their cats actually killing all that wildlife, so they just are in denial of how effective their cats are as predators. And for many people, they also worry about welfare. So this is the small study that was done in Canada, looking at both the perceptions of free roaming cats and also asking people why they did let their cats outside. So I think it's a good view into why some people still let their cats outside. And it really comes down to welfare. I think because culturally we're so used to just letting cats free roam, there's a perception that if we don't do that, that it's negative for them. This was a quote from one of the people surveyed. They said, I think cats are meant to be able to explore as they would if they were not domestic. They need to be able to enjoy their lives and not be trapped just for human satisfaction. And I think this is a pretty common sentiment. And I think it's great that people are worried about the well-being and the welfare of their cats. And I do feel that in some of these conversations about wildlife and cats, that the discussions about cat welfare are often left out. You see people just saying, well, just keep your cats inside, and then that's the end of the conversation. But if you have a cat and you're worried about their well-being, thinking about what comes next for that cat is an important part of this discussion about keeping cats inside and keeping wildlife safe. So I have the rest of the talk is actually devoted to talking about ways that we can help cats be able to survive survive and thrive, not just survive, but thrive in an indoor environment, and helping them cope with not being free ranging. Both of my cats were free ranging cats before we got them. One was a cat that actually had been abandoned. That's Jake. That's the one that was shot. He was abandoned on a farm. So he was a stray that someone just abandoned. Minnie likely had a family, but she was rescued from a pack of dogs that were chasing her. They weren't able to find her family, so she was taken in by the rescue, and we ended up with her. Both of them were free-ranging cats, and they've adapted well to being inside. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the rest of the talk. So in my opening slide, I showed a picture of my cat Jake in a catio. And this is a great way for cats to enjoy some outdoor time while still being safe. So they're kept safe from the threats that could kill or cause them harm. And they also are kept enclosed so that they can't cause harm to wildlife, as long as the wildlife stays out of the catio. I say that because we occasionally do get things coming into our catio, but it is quite rare compared to if our cats were free roaming. So these are a couple examples of catios. They typically are a structure that has wire on the outside with shelves for cats to climb and perch in. These are a couple other examples. They can be quite simple, like in the previous slide where they were just kind of a box. These ones are more complex, where there's even multiple levels and places for the cats to run around. At the end of my talk, I'll show you some slides with some DIY resources, so you'll be able to find links for actually sourcing materials or information about how to build a catio, if that's of interest to you. You can also use catios to add enrichment to your cat's life, both in the way that they're built. So here's Minnie enjoying our catio. Here's a couple other cats enjoying catios. Sorry, there we go. The slide was slow to change over, but this is on the left, you have a cat that's climbing a cat scratcher that was put in the catio. On the right, you have one that is walking a really high shelf. So you can think about how you could add enrichment to these catios to not just make them, places to be outside, but also for the cats to have some enjoyment of that area. We actually have a door like this. It goes through our wall into the catio, which I was actually a little hesitant to do when it was presented to us as an option. But I decided that having the door was better than having the cats yell at us constantly to let them in and out of the catio. Because if you have cats, you know that they're pretty persistent. And we actually had our house assessed to see how airtight it is. And that cat door actually didn't have an impact on how airtight our house is, and doesn't really have a big impact on how cold it gets in the winter. So it actually has worked out really well. These are some other examples. Cats are actually really social. So we put some chairs in our catio. So if I want, I can go sit in the catio with the cats. And this is Minnie. I sat on one chair. She came down, sat on the other chair. She really enjoyed having me there. On the right of the slide are some branches that I put in, and they really enjoyed that. So you can think of just random things that might smell good to them or just make it more interesting for them. And that can really entertain them if they're not cats that get to explore freely. You can also add plants. So this is catmint, which some cats really like. Turns out my cats don't really care too much for it. So it was just a pretty plant that I ended up having in the catio, but you could plant catnip or other plants as well. Now, not everyone's able to put up a catio and either have it built by someone or build it themselves. There are lots of other indoor things you can do. So these are some examples of indoor enrichment. So a lot of the pictures I showed you in the previous slides were from this company called Hella's Custom Catios, and they're the ones who built our catio. They also built some of the ones in the previous pictures. They also do these indoor shelves for cats. cats love to get up high. And so having shelves like this where they can get up high and kind of explore their environment can really be helpful. And if you want to do it yourself, you can also build it yourself. So here's some pictures from the top of what it looks like. It's actually just shelving with carpeting on it. And so you can do that yourself as well if you're handy enough. And it might seem really simple, but playing with cats is actually a really big part of their enrichment. They really like having social time with their people. And playing with them is one way that you can make sure that they get that interactive time. And there's actually studies that have shown that playing with cats actually reduces hunting behavior in free roaming cats, suggesting that playing with them actually helps them be happy indoors and actually satisfies some of those instincts that they are looking for outlets for. These are kind of more conventional ways that a lot of people try and increase enrichment with their cats. The next set of slides are maybe a little less conventional, although it is becoming more common. I hike with my cats. Not as much anymore. Jake used to love adventures, and this is actually a picture of him walking on leash with my friend's daughter, and this was actually at Elk Island. And we would take him places like that where on leash animals are allowed, and we would hike with him. He's now a bit old and arthritic, so he's not as much into those big hikes. But we still walk them around our neighborhood, even if all they do is hang out in our front yard, like Minnie on the right of this screen. They really enjoy that chance to get out. So you actually can supplement their time outside rather than letting them just free roam. You can take them out and spend time with them outside and let them explore their environment with you, whether that's in their front yard or whether that's on adventures like Jake used to go on. So he used to go hiking with me. This is actually in Connecticut, where we actually flew there when my spouse was living there for a couple years. This is in Canmore in the mountains. And just all of these hikes, he really enjoyed it, and it would be a great way of enriching his life. You can also take them on car rides if your cat doesn't get car sick. Minnie, our cat, gets car sick, so she does not like car rides. You can get meds for car sickness, but we didn't figure that out until after she'd already developed an aversion to the car, whereas Jake loves car rides. Maybe should be a little safer than when I've got him in these pictures. This was before I knew that, you know, you could have buckles for animals and you could have them in crates to keep them safe. And but, you know, he still really likes to take these car rides and smell new smells. And sometimes all we do is take him on a car ride down the road and let him walk on the street. He gets a bit of new environment to check out. He smells things and then he wants to go home. And then he sleeps for the rest of the day. So I think a lot of us are used to cats just kind of hanging out with us and not doing much with them. But a lot of cats actually really like these kinds of adventures that we more typically think of dogs doing. Another option is actually to have them free ranging in backyards. So this really only works if you have the right backyard for it. So in our yard, we have a 6-foot plastic fence, and that's sufficient to contain them because both of our cats are seniors and they aren't able to jump high enough to get out. So depending on what your backyard is and how safe it is, if you have a lot of wildlife in your area, maybe this isn't a safe option. But where we are, we have dogs, so that tends to deter a lot of wildlife from coming into our yard. And they can't jump out, so they get to hang out. And they both love it. This is Minnie hanging out on one of the chairs with an umbrella over her head in the heat of the sun. And Jake likes to scratch some of the posts and trees that we have in the backyard. Here you can see they like to help with gardening. Cat helping where they're not actually helping, but they think they are. So we do have cat safe plants in our backyard. If you do have them in your backyard, you do have to be careful about what you plant there. There are a lot of plants that are common garden plants that are deadly to cats or toxic. One example is lilies. Lilies are deadly to cats. So make sure you do your research if you're going to have your cats free range in your backyard to make sure that you don't have anything that could cause them harm. So we grow things that they don't tend to like, so that they ignore it, so they don't destroy our garden. Like it looks like Minnie's destroying our garden here in the planter, but this was actually just after I'd planted it. And once the plants grew a bit more, she actually didn't go into this planter anymore. But we also have raspberries in our backyard. They love to just hide under those raspberries. So you can actually think of ways that you can make your backyard a little sanctuary for them, if that's, something that you're able to do in your backyard. Jake is a senior, so a lot of times he sleeps right now and doesn't do much, but occasionally he does actually like to even climb trees in our backyard. Our trees are not particularly safe, so we always get a little nervous when he suddenly gets a burst of energy and races up one of these trees unexpectedly. But you can also simulate this with safe climbing spots for them in the backyard if you have areas where they're not going to be able to jump over the fence if they're climbing up on the climbing structures that you create for them. But you can also see why they'd love having climbing areas inside if this is what they do when they're outside. They just really like that. And if you have a backyard that is potentially good for cats, but they are able to get over the fence, one option is to look at using coyote rollers. And this would also help keep wildlife out of your yard if that is a potential risk in your area. So coyote rollers are basically tubes that go over the top of the fence. And if an animal, such as a cat or a coyote, tries to jump the fence, they're not able to get any traction. So they'll jump up at the top of the fence and they'll just start to spin, and they end up just ending up back on the side of the fence that they started on. So this could both be a way to keep your cats safe if you do want to try seeing if they can hang out in your backyard, and also a way to contain them. You can buy actual coyote rollers like at this website, although I think this is a US website and I've never tried to purchase anything from them. But I'm sure you could also come up with a DIY solution with PVC piping. To be a pretty simple solution to try and keep them in your yard. So beyond outdoor exploration, either through hikes or through backyard time, or even just walks around your neighborhood, there are other ways that you can help cats enjoy enrichment and help them pass their time inside and feel fulfilled. So one reason that cats like to get outside is that they like to hunt. And so one way you can simulate that is you can make their food harder to eat. These are all puzzle toys that you can get from pet stores. Some of them are actually made for dogs, but we have some that are made for dogs and our cats use them. Some of them are made for cats. So some of these are toys that you would put the food in, and all of the kind of internal parts of the puzzle toy just make it harder for the animal to eat it directly. So our cat that uses a puzzle toy, she actually uses her paws and she reaches into the puzzle toy and grabs kibble with her claws and then pulls it out and either eats it directly from her paw or puts it on the ground, on the floor next to it, and then eats it off the floor or off the table if she's got a little table she eats on. That's one option. You can also get licky mats, which are mats that you can spread wet food on that are hard to eat off of, and so it slows them down, makes it a little bit more time consuming. And then you can also get interactive toys like these ones with feathers on them that actually have food in them, and the cats can kind of play and hunt and either scoop food out through the holes or roll the ball around and get kibble kicked out of it as they do that. And so all of these are ways to make life more interesting for indoor cats, and they actually really like it. If you're interacting with them and they're kind of using their hunting skills while they're getting their food, that's part of what they're getting out of being free ranging cats. You're actually simulating that behavior inside. And if you don't want to buy DIY toys, you can actually make them. These all have dogs in them because a lot of these discussions happen around dogs, but more and more people are realizing that cats also need this kind of enrichment. So you certainly could use it with cats. You can take a muffin tin and either put the food right into the tin or you can use tennis balls to make it a little harder to get the food, or you can flip the muffin tin upside down and just put the kibble in between all of the tins. I also have taken toilet paper rolls and folded over one end and then stuffed food, kibble, into the toilet paper roll through the open end. And Minnie would actually reach in through the toilet paper roll, grab the kibble from the end of it, and then pull it out, and then she would eat it. And she's getting a bit older and lazier now, but when she was younger, she did really enjoy that way of getting treats. So these are all ways that you can slow them down a bit and help them enjoy their food a bit more and actually incorporate some challenges and some hunting. One other thing that you can learn if you are thinking about keeping your cat indoors is to learn more about their behavior, because you're going to interact more with them if they're going to be inside and not going out and exploring. A lot of people actually find it hard to understand cat body language, and that can make it harder if you're spending a lot of time together, but you don't understand each other. So this is one example that was in a scientific paper that came out recently. If you didn't know, cats will actually slow blink to communicate positive emotions. So to me, it looks a little bit like a smile because they squint their eyes at you. And I've actually shown people pictures of my cats doing this, and they've totally interpreted it as a negative thing. They'll see the half closed eyes and they think the cat's angry, or they think the cat's plotting something. And it's just a good example of how a lot of people don't actually understand cat behavior. And so that's where some of the problem behaviors can come in with cats. If you can't communicate with one another, that can be a challenge. So you can learn more about their behaviors and their needs to see if there's something that you're missing from their behavior. So this study talks a bit about that miscommunication that can happen. But I'll also show you a link at the end of the lecture, sorry, I've been talking in a class all day. At the end of this webinar, where you can learn more about cat behavior. Also, just an aside, if you are having some challenging problems with some of your cats, with some behavioral problems, one thing that can be really good is to get a vet check. Cats are really good at hiding pain and health issues. And a lot of times that there is a problem behavior that has just popped up, it often is some kind of health issue. Not all the times. It might be that you need to change something in your environment for the cat because you just maybe are missing some part of what they need. But a lot of times it can also be health related. So one of our cats was starting to become even more grumpy than usual. He's a bit of a grumpy senior, but he was becoming extra grumpy. He was yelling at us all night. He was even becoming a bit aggressive at times. He was becoming weird with his food. Turns out it was a thyroid condition, easily fixed with daily medication. But if we hadn't got a vet check done, we wouldn't have realized that. And that's actually quite common with our pets if you're seeing changes in behavior. So learning more about your pet, and especially cats, can really help with that. The last thing I want to tell you about before I show you a few resources and then wrap up this talk is cat training. So I have dogs that I train. They're my hunting dogs. We do a lot of dog sports. So I've done a lot of dog training. And the cats started to get in the way when I was dog training and started to get really annoyed that I was paying attention to the dogs and ignoring the cats. So I actually started to train both of them. Jake started to not be as interested. I think his arthritis just got bad enough that he wasn't as interested. But Minnie has shown a lot of interest in cat training. And I think she's a great example of a cat that could be a problem otherwise if I didn't find ways to engage with her, because she has a lot of energy and she likes a lot of attention. But by finding ways to keep her mentally interested in life, in our relationship, she's actually been a really good house cat as a result. So this is a picture of her jumping between platforms over a post. And I'll show you a couple other examples of some of the behaviors I trained, just in case you aren't convinced that cats can actually be trained. So this is Minnie jumping from one platform to another through a hoop over the back of a dog. So obviously very patient dog as well, but actually not something I would have thought that Minnie would do because she thinks that dogs are disgusting. She just tolerates having them in her house. But she was very happy to do this trick. I was surprised. So that's one trick. I'll show you a couple others. So that's a high five, which is one of her favorite tricks. And then she was thinking about begging there, which is another trick she does. This one I really liked training. So she's supposed to tell me which cup has the treats in it. So you can see how that goes. So she got that one right. She's telling me which one has the food by tapping it. And you can see that Jake also wants to be involved. He really just wants the treats. So I'm just trying to bribe him to keep out of the way. But, if you'd asked me even a year before I did this, would my cats be so interested in training that I have to be like keeping one back while I'm training the other? I would not have guessed that they'd be this excited. It does take a bit more patience because they do seem to think about things a bit more. So with my dogs, this whole thing would have been like a 30-second round to do these two tricks. And Minnie takes a bit more time. So you do need to be a bit more patient. You often have to break the behaviors down more for the cats so that they understand what you're asking. But there's a lot of cats that are really interested in doing training. And this is pretty advanced training, but you can even do basics with them. So I laughed because I actually thought she was going to get it wrong. And then she got it right. So she did really well. So Minnie, because of her trick, she now has several titles. So if you're not a dog sports person, we often set goals for our dogs and they earn titles through completing certain tasks. Minnie has several titles through the program Do More With Your Dog, which, as the name suggests, is typically a program for dogs. But because she just likes training so much, she actually earned, I think she's got 3 or 4 titles through them now. And she's almost got one of the higher level titles that you can get through the organization. We just have 2 more tricks to do for her to earn that. So cats can be trained. This is an example of trying to get all of my animals together. Jake is not that interested, so we just ended up with Minnie and the 2 dogs who all were giving goofy faces. So cats get this reputation as being aloof and not as needy as dogs and not needing as much social interaction and not being trainable, but they actually are really trainable and really enjoy that interaction with their people. So I highly recommend clicker training if you are interested in trying to train your cat. Even basic things like training them to go into crates or training them to go on a platform, or training them to accept medical care without struggling. There's lots of resources that I'll give you that you can look up how to do those things. And that's one way that you can keep your cat entertained. And doing a couple tricks like this really works their brain and it tires them out more than you would expect. I will say though, make sure you have the right treats because cats do not work for free. Dogs might be more willing to work for free. Cats absolutely do not. These treats, for whatever reason, cats love them. Every person that I've suggested to try these with their cat's been obsessed. So the brand is Inaba and the treat is called Churu. It's like a gooey treat. It only has like 1 or 2 ingredients in it and it's really low calories. So it actually works really well as a treat, but it is expensive to buy. So you can experiment with other things like freeze-dried meats, like chicken can be good. Even just cooking and chopping up meats like chicken breast could be an option. So I'm almost done my talk. I've really appreciated you listening to me. I hope that you found it interesting, that you learned something about either cats and their relationship with wildlife, or about how to keep those cats entertained when they are inside. Before I finish up though, I'm just going to give you a few resources. So over the next several slides, I do have some QR codes. So if you want to look at any of these resources, make sure you get your phone out now so that you can take a picture of the QR codes. Well, don't actually take a picture. You can just scan the QR code and it'll take you to these websites that I'm mentioning. But of course, this talk is also recorded, so you can always come back and revisit these resources at a later time. If you want to build a catio, this is a great resource. Hella's is the company that built our catio, and they're in the Edmonton area. They do a wide variety of things, from building catios to designing catios and sending the materials to people. But they also have this book that teaches you how to build a catio. So if you are a DIY kind of person, this is one thing that you could look into. There are a lot of resources for cat training, so I've pulled out a couple that are helpful. This is a course from Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. Fenzi Dog Sports Academy is a great online program for training animals. Generally, as the name suggests, it's for dogs, but there are other animals that take these classes. I was once in an online class where someone was training their camel to do a retrieve in one of the classes, so you do get other species. But as a part of the program, they do have this online course that you can take to learn more about cats. So this is a really good resource for that. There's also this program called Nosework Cats, where you teach your cat to search for food. I did this with Minnie. Again, she's getting a little older and not as mobile. She is a little overweight, and she's constantly on a diet. So she's not quite as interested in this now as she was a couple years ago. But I got her to the point that she would actually search a whole room for just a little bit of treat that was smudged on the wall. And she would actually have to search where I had hidden the food in the room. So this program teaches you to do that with your cats. And again, a really good way to get their hunting instincts, their smelling instincts, all of those things that they would usually do when they're outside. There's also a local person here in Edmonton. The company is called Sit, Stay, Squat. She also does massage. So if you have a senior cat like ours who is quite stiff, you can get massages for them. It sounds quite extravagant to get an animal massage, but I'm from the sports dog world, where that's actually not that unusual. We do weird things for our animals because we also ask a lot of them when we do a lot of high impact sports. But for our cat, Jake, it actually makes a big difference. And some of those instances where I showed you pictures of him climbing trees were right after his massages, where he was a lot less painful than he normally is. But this person also has an online cat fitness course that you can take. So if you're interested, I've got the link there. There's a couple other resources if you're trying to learn more about your cat, more about enrichment. This website is great because there's a lot of blog posts that are research-based. The person who runs this website is a cat researcher, but they're also someone who is highly educated in treating cat behavioral problems. So if you're having any problems, problem behaviors, they can help you with that, or you can read through their resources to try and troubleshoot that. They also have a great Instagram website where they summarize some of this stuff in short videos or posts. So really good resource if you're trying to learn more about cat behavior. The ASPCA, so the Alberta SPCA, has this great set of resources. So this website takes you to this website is specifically about indoor versus outdoor cat discussion, but at the bottom of the page, there's links to a whole bunch of other resources that are really great sources of information from a local organization here in Alberta. BC also has a few. So this is the BC Stewardship Center, and they have several resources. So this is the website, but these are some of the examples. They have some guides and reports about the impacts of cats on bird populations and suggestions for reducing that by keeping cats indoors. And also some tools, like if you want to be able to communicate this to other people, they do have some handouts that you can use and some briefing notes. And then they also have some webinars that are at the bottom talking about cats and birds and also talking about cat body language. The last one that I'll mention is that the BCSPCA also has some good tips on enrichment. So they are another great source for being able to look up more enrichment tips. I covered a few of these in this lecture, or in this discussion. Sorry, again, I'm used to talking about lectures because that's what I do during the day. But yeah, in this webinar, I talked about some of these ideas, but you'll probably hear a few more of them if you look up this website. So that's all I had to cover today, but I'd be happy to take any of your questions.